It was a calm evening at the restaurant, that kind of evening where the lights were warm, the music was soft, and everything felt peaceful but slightly boring. The waiters moved around slowly, taking orders, serving drinks, cleaning tables, and pretending to be cheerful. Most customers were relaxed, talking quietly, enjoying their meals. Nothing exciting ever really happened there. It was a normal night like countless nights before. That changed when a new customer walked in. He was a man who immediately caught attention, not because he tried to, but because of the way he carried himself. He walked with confidence, not the loud, arrogant kind, but the quiet kind that comes from someone who has achieved a lot in life. His hair was silver at the sides, his suit was elegant, and his face looked both calm and serious. People often say you can spot success without knowing anything about the person, and this man was a perfect example of that. His name was Mr. Bennett, though no one in the restaurant knew that yet. He was a well-known investor, famous among business circles for turning small ideas into grand successes. Newspaper articles had written about him, entrepreneurs respected him, and competitors feared him. But tonight, he was just a customer looking for dinner after a long day. When he entered, the hostess greeted him politely and led him to a table near the grand piano positioned in the corner. The piano was a beautiful black instrument, shiny and elegant, but it hardly ever got used. It was more decoration than music. The waitress assigned to serve Mr. Bennett was Emma, a young woman in her early 20s. She wore a neat uniform, a tired smile, and a face that showed she wasn't having the best day. She was polite, quick, and skilled at her job, but there was something restless about her. She seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. Mr. Bennett ordered his meal with a polite tone, and Emma nodded, writing down his choices. She didn't know who he was, nor did she really care. Customers came and went. Some were nice, some were rude, and most were forgettable. She just wanted to finish her shift and go home. But something unusual happened as the evening continued. Every time Emma passed by the piano, she slowed down, almost unconsciously. Her eyes flickered toward it for a moment, long enough to be noticeable if someone was paying attention. It wasn't a random glance. It was a silent longing, like she wanted to walk over, sit down, and play, but something inside her stopped her every time. Mr. Bennett noticed. He wasn't the type of man who ignored details. His success came from observing people, reading their behavior, and noticing things others overlooked. He could tell Emma had a complicated relationship with that piano. It wasn't just a piece of furniture to her, it was something personal. He watched her from a distance, not staring rudely but observing with quiet curiosity. He noticed how her eyes softened when she looked at the piano, how her posture changed, how her expression briefly shifted from tired to thoughtful, almost emotional. He wondered who she really was, not the waitress serving tables, but the person behind that uniform. Emma delivered his food, refilled water glasses, and continued working smoothly, but she avoided the piano during busier moments. However, as soon as she thought no one was looking, her gaze wandered again. It was like she was fighting two versions of herself, the practical girl doing her job and the person who once loved music. Mr. Bennett found himself becoming more intrigued with every passing minute. He didn't know her story, but he sensed there was one. Talent, regret, fear, those things often lived behind quiet eyes. Several times, Emma paused near the piano, then forced herself to walk away, almost angrily, as if she hated her own desire. She didn't realize anyone was watching. She assumed her feelings were invisible, but they were. Mr. Bennett leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers thoughtfully against his glass. He wasn't planning to interfere. He didn't want to embarrass her or make her uncomfortable. But he also didn't believe in wasted potential. He continued eating, waiting, watching. He was curious but patient, the way a chess player waits for the right move. Emma, on the other hand, was growing more tense. The more she avoided the piano, the more she thought about it. Her mind wandered back to a time before this restaurant, before this job, before she became someone who hid her dreams instead of chasing them. She remembered stages, competitions, music sheets, late-night practice sessions, applause. And she remembered the moment it all ended. She shook her head, trying to push away those memories. They were too heavy, too painful. She didn't want to think about who she used to be. Mr. Bennett noticed her discomfort, which only confirmed what he suspected. She didn't avoid the piano because she didn't care. She avoided it because she cared too much. Eventually, Emma approached his table again to refill his glass. He looked at her carefully, studying her expression, but he didn't speak yet. She gave a polite smile, the kind that meant "I'm fine, please don't ask questions." She started to walk away, but Mr. Bennett spoke, his voice calm and gentle. "Tell me," he said, glancing toward the piano, "do you play?" Emma froze, her heart jumped, her breath stopped. Her face changed instantly, revealing shock, fear, and embarrassment all at once. And in that moment, Mr. Bennett knew something important. There was a story inside this young woman. A story she had been trying desperately to hide. And tonight, whether she liked it or not, that story was about to unfold. Emma didn't answer right away. The simple question hit her like a sudden gust of wind on a cold night, sharp, unexpected, impossible to ignore. She stared at Mr. Bennet, her cheeks warming with embarrassment. She wasn't used to customers noticing anything about her besides whether she got their order right. "I know," she muttered quietly, forcing a smile. "I don't play." It was a weak answer and she knew it. Her voice didn't sound confident. It sounded like someone trying to hide something, hoping no one would look too closely. Mr. Bennet raised an eyebrow, not convinced. "You don't play," he repeated gently, as if giving her a chance to correct herself. Emma swallowed, eyes flickering toward the piano before she could stop them. It betrayed her instantly, exposing her secret before she said a word. She looked away quickly, annoyed at her own reaction. "I used to," she whispered, almost hoping he wouldn't hear. Mr. Bennet leaned slightly forward, intrigued. "What stopped you?" Emma's heart twisted. She didn't want to explain. She didn't want to open doors she had sealed shut years ago, so she shook her head and forced a bigger, fake smile. "It doesn't matter, that was a long time ago." Mr. Bennet didn't push for now. He simply nodded, letting the conversation fall silent. Emma turned to leave, relieved that he didn't press her further. But as she walked away, she could feel his eyes on her, watching not with judgment but with curiosity, like someone who could see a puzzle and wanted to solve it. Emma returned to her tasks, trying to bury the conversation in her mind. She took orders, carried plates, cleared tables. But her thoughts kept circling around that one moment, that one question, as if her brain refused to let go. "Do you play?" Those three words had unlocked a box she'd kept sealed for years. She remembered being a child, barely tall enough to see the piano keys, sitting on a stool while her mother gently pressed her tiny fingers down on the first notes of a simple tune. She remembered laughter, encouragement, pride. She remembered competitions, performances, bright lights, and applause. And she remembered the night it all went wrong. The frozen hands, the shaking voice, the silence of a stunned audience. The unbearable humiliation. The memory still made her stomach tighten. Since then, she had avoided pianos, not because she didn't love music, but because she couldn't handle the memory of failure. Mr. Bennet, meanwhile, continued eating quietly, but he wasn't done with his question. He waited until Emma passed his table again, then said something unexpected. "You know," he began calmly, "some people stop doing what they love because life gets busy. Others stop because they never loved it enough. But a few stop because they care so deeply, the fear becomes overwhelming." Emma's steps slowed. She didn't want to look at him, but she couldn't avoid hearing him. "You strike me as the third type," he said. Emma forced a laugh, trying to make his observation sound ridiculous. "You don't even know me." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes you don't need to know someone to see the truth." His words annoyed her, not because they were insulting, but because they were too accurate. She felt exposed, like he had seen all the things she worked hard to hide. She crossed her arms defensively. "Why do you care?" Mr. Bennet shrugged lightly. "I don't, not in the way you think, I just recognize something familiar." "Familiar?" Emma repeated, confused. "Yes," he replied. "Talented people running from their own gifts." Emma's chest tightened again and she shook her head. "Please don't psychoanalyze me, I'm just a waitress doing her job." Mr. Bennet didn't argue. He nodded and said maybe. The words maybe hung in the air, heavy with meaning. It was neither agreement nor disagreement. It was a challenge, a gentle one, but still a challenge. Emma walked away quickly, wishing the whole conversation had never happened. She didn't like strangers seeing through her. She didn't like reminders of who she used to be, but the more she tried to forget, the more the question followed her. "Do you play?" She hated how those words made her feel, exposed, vulnerable, childish. She wished she could say no and mean it, but she couldn't because she still cared, even after all these years. Her coworkers didn't help either. They had overheard parts of the conversation and started teasing her. "You play piano seriously?" "Why didn't you tell us? Play something for us, Emma." Emma rolled her eyes and brushed it off, but inside, embarrassment burned. She didn't want attention, she didn't want pressure, she didn't want expectations. When she brought Mr. Bennet's bill, she hoped that would end everything. She placed it on the table and said with a professional smile, "Let me know if you need anything else." He looked at her calmly, almost kindly, and said, "I do." Emma paused. What? He glanced toward the piano. "Play something." Emma froze. She stared at him, shocked, unsure if she heard correctly. Her voice came out in a nervous whisper. "No, I can't. Please don't ask me that." Mr. Bennet didn't pressure her with force or arrogance. He simply smiled the way people smile when they already know the outcome. "Just one song," he said softly. "For yourself, not for anyone else." Emma shook her head, backing away. "I can't. I won't." He sighed gently. "Fear is loud, isn't it?" His words struck her harder than any argument. Before she could reply, he leaned back and said calmly, "I'll be here a while, think about it." Emma walked away quickly, her heart racing. She didn't want to play, she didn't want to feel, she didn't want to remember. But one truth haunted her with every step. Deep down, she wasn't afraid of playing the piano. She was afraid of what playing it would make her face. Emma spent the next several minutes pretending to be busy, but her mind was a storm she couldn't control. She walked from table to table, checking glasses, rearranging napkins, wiping down surfaces that were already clean. Anything to avoid stopping. Anything to avoid thinking, but thinking was impossible to escape. Every step she took, every breath she drew, she could feel the weight of Mr. Bennet's request pressing down on her chest. It wasn't just about playing a song, it was about touching a part of herself she had promised to bury. About facing a fear she had carefully avoided for years. She tried to convince herself that rejecting the request was the right choice. That saying no made her strong, that she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She repeated these thoughts like a mantra, hoping they would help her feel better. They didn't. Because deep down, she knew she wasn't rejecting the piano. She was running away from it, again. Her coworkers had finally stopped teasing her, but she could still feel their curiosity. Every time she passed someone, she sensed their eyes following her, waiting to see if she would do something dramatic. She hated being watched. She hated attention. She hated pressure. She wasn't built for the spotlight, not anymore. She passed by the piano, trying not to look at it, but her gaze slipped anyway. Just a glance, just half a second. But it was enough to feel something stir inside her, something old, fragile, and familiar. The piano wasn't just an instrument, it was a memory. A life she once led, a future she never reached. Her fingers twitched, almost wanting to touch the keys almost. But the memory of that terrible night rushed back into her mind, vivid and unforgiving. She remembered walking onto a brightly lit stage, heart pounding, palms sweating. She remembered sitting at the piano, facing an audience filled with strangers and judges. She remembered the pressure, the expectation to be perfect. Then she remembered the moment everything went wrong. The notes slipped, her hands froze. Her mind went blank. Silence, long, heavy silence, an audience waiting, a girl unable to move. She felt their disappointment like a punch to the stomach. She heard whispers, saw pity, felt shame burning her skin. And that was the moment she decided it was over. No more performing, no more dreaming, no more risk. Being invisible felt safer than being talented. So she walked away from the piano, from her teacher, from everything she had loved. She took a simple job, lived a quiet life, and tried to become someone ordinary. Tonight, however, that ordinary life felt fragile, like it could collapse with one simple choice. Play or don't play, two tiny words. But they held the power to change everything. Emma rubbed her hands together, trying to calm her shaking fingers. She wished she could call someone for advice, her mother, her old music teacher, anyone. But she had cut herself off from that entire world. There was no one left to guide her, so she walked alone, emotionally and physically. When she passed Mr. Bennet's table again, she could feel him noticing her discomfort. Not with a smirk, not with enjoyment, but with understanding. He wasn't mocking her. He wasn't trying to win. He wasn't challenging her ego. He was challenging her fear, and that made her even more uncomfortable. Why would a stranger care? Why would someone so successful pay attention to a waitress who tried so hard to disappear? She placed a few plates on a tray, but her hands were shaking so badly one almost slipped. She caught it just in time, cheeks flushing with embarrassment. She glanced around to make sure no one noticed. Someone did, Mr. Bennet. He didn't say anything, but his eyes softened. That made her feel even more exposed. Finally, she escaped to the staff hallway, leaning against the wall, breathing heavily. Her heart raced as if she had run for miles. She pressed her palms against her face, trying to stop tears she didn't want. "It's just a stupid song," she whispered to herself. "It doesn't matter, none of this matters." But she knew she was lying. Music mattered, the piano mattered, her past mattered, and most painfully, she still cared. After a moment of silence, she took a deep breath and walked back into the restaurant. Customers were chatting again, unaware of the emotional hurricane inside her. She forced a smile, pretending to be fine. Then she felt someone behind her. "Emma," Mr. Bennet said quietly, her body stiffened. She turned slowly, dread tightening every muscle. He didn't look angry or impatient, he simply looked honest. "You don't have to impress me," he said, "or anyone." Emma swallowed. "Then why ask me to play?" He held her gaze. "Because you looked sad every time you walked past that piano, and then you looked heartbroken when you walked away from it." Emma blinked, stunned. She didn't know anyone could see that clearly. "It's not about being perfect," he continued. "It's about remembering what makes you feel alive." Alive, that word felt dangerous. "I'm scared," she whispered, barely audible. He nodded gently. "I know." Silence stretched between them, soft, fragile, full of unspoken truths. Then he said one simple sentence that pierced through every barrier she had built. "Do it scared." Emma's eyes widened, breath trembling. He wasn't asking her to be confident. He wasn't asking her to be brave. He was asking her to take one step while afraid. Not later, not someday, tonight. Emma looked at the piano once more, and this time, instead of walking away, she started walking toward it. Emma walked slowly toward the piano, each step feeling heavier than the last. She didn't feel brave, she didn't feel ready. She felt terrified, like someone walking into a storm without an umbrella. But her feet moved anyway, pulled forward by some invisible force she didn't understand. Her coworkers noticed almost immediately. Conversations paused, heads turned, gentle whispers spread across the room. No one expected her to actually go through with it. For them, it was a light-hearted moment, a bit of entertainment at the end of a long shift. But for Emma, it was something completely different. It was a battle with a ghost she thought she had buried years ago. When she reached the piano, she stopped in front of it, staring at the glossy keys. The shiny black surface reflected her nervous face, wide eyes, tense mouth, the look of someone who wanted to run but couldn't. Her hands trembled slightly. Not because she was weak, but because she was stepping into a part of herself she had avoided for too long. Behind her, the restaurant staff and a few remaining customers watched silently. The atmosphere shifted from casual to curious, from background noise to quiet suspense. No one cheered, no one encouraged loudly. People just waited, unsure of what they were about to witness. Emma slowly pulled out the bench and sat down. The wood creaked softly beneath her weight, reminding her of every piano bench she had ever sat on. She placed her hands on her lap first, pressing them together to stop the shaking. She took a deep breath, slow, shaky, incomplete. Mr. Bennett watched from his table, not too close, not too far, his eyes steady and supportive. He didn't speak. He didn't smile, he simply waited. His presence was grounding, like a lighthouse in a storm, quiet, steady, and reassuring. Emma lifted her hands toward the keys but stopped halfway, frozen. She couldn't touch them yet. She closed her eyes and reminded herself of Mr. Bennett's words. Do it scared. Not fearless, just willing. Her fingers finally touched the white keys, cold at first, then warm with her skin. The texture brought a flood of memories. She remembered practicing late into the night. She remembered playing for crowds, playing for herself, playing because she loved it. But then she remembered the stage lights, the shaking hands, the silence after failure. Her heart hammered painfully. What if I mess up, she whispered inside her mind. But then another voice, softer, stronger, answered, so what? She pressed a single note, soft, hesitant, delicate. It echoed through the restaurant, louder than she expected. People looked up, surprised by the raw, fragile sound. She pressed a second note, then a third. Slowly, a simple melody formed, nothing complicated, nothing dramatic, just a series of soft notes that carried more emotion than technical skill. In the beginning, her fingers moved stiffly, almost clumsy. She was rusty, uncertain, scared of each mistake. Her shoulders were tense, her breath uneven, but as she continued, something changed. Her body began to relax, her hands loosened. Her breathing softened. The melody grew smoother, more confident, more natural. The piano wasn't just an object anymore. It was a conversation between her past and her present, her fear and her courage, her failure and her hope. People listened in silence, not because the music was flawless, but because it was honest. Emma wasn't performing, she was remembering. Mr. Bennett noticed the shift. The nervous girl who walked toward the piano was being replaced by someone he didn't know yet, someone she used to be, someone she could be again. Emma's eyes stayed closed because closing them made the world disappear. It made the music easier. It made the fear quieter. Each note felt like a step forward, and although her hands weren't perfect, they were steady enough to keep going. A few customers leaned forward, curious. Someone whispered, I didn't know she could play. Another said, she's actually good. The staff, who usually saw Emma as just another coworker, were stunned. They had never imagined she had something like this hidden inside her, something delicate, powerful, and emotional. The melody shifted, growing richer, deeper, more expressive. Emma's face softened, her eyebrows relaxed. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like a musician, vulnerable, passionate, alive. And then, for a moment, she forgot her fear completely. She played freely, without hesitation, without overthinking. The piano responded like an old friend, happy to see her again. Notes spilled into the air, soft and warm, filling every empty corner of the restaurant. Mr. Bennett smiled, not because she was perfect, but because she was brave. But the moment didn't last forever. Suddenly, Emma hit a wrong key, loud and harsh. The sound snapped her out of her calm state instantly. Panic surged through her body like electricity. Her muscles stiffened. Her hands froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Her mind jumped to that night, the stage, the lights, the silence. The memory swallowed her so fast she couldn't stop it. She stopped playing altogether. The room fell silent. For a few terrifying seconds, she sat motionless as if time had stopped. Her eyes opened wide, filled with fear, confusion, shame. But this time, something was different. No one laughed. No one whispered. No one stared with judgment. They waited, patient, silent, giving her space to breathe. Emma took a shaky breath. She wasn't a child on a stage anymore. She wasn't being judged by strangers who expected perfection. She was a young woman trying to rediscover something she loved in a restaurant, surrounded by ordinary people. She wasn't failing, she was learning. She lifted her fingers again, slow, uncertain, and pressed another note, then another. The melody continued, softer now, more fragile but still alive. She didn't need to be flawless, she just needed to keep going. Mr. Bennet nodded once, quietly proud. And Emma, with fear still sitting beside her, finished the song. Not perfectly, but beautifully, because she didn't quit. When Emma played that final note, she lifted her hands slowly from the keys as if they were made of glass. The soft sound faded into the air, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy but peaceful. She stared at the piano in front of her, unsure whether she had succeeded or failed, unsure whether she should be proud or ashamed. For a moment, no one spoke. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty, but full of something unnamed, something fragile. Then unexpectedly, someone clapped. Just one person at first, a woman sitting at a table near the back. Her applause wasn't loud or dramatic, it was gentle, appreciative, respectful. But that single sound opened a door. Soon another person clapped, then a third, then a few more, until the room filled with soft applause that surrounded Emma like a warm hug. Emma didn't know how to react. She wasn't used to being noticed. She wasn't used to being praised. She pressed her hands tightly together as if trying to make herself smaller to disappear into the bench. But the applause didn't stop. It didn't roar or explode. It didn't demand attention. It simply existed, honest and kind. People weren't cheering because she was perfect. They were cheering because she was brave. Emma blinked rapidly, trying to keep tears from falling. Crying in front of strangers was the last thing she wanted. She took a deep breath and looked up, her eyes meeting the faces around her. She expected judgment, criticism, amusement. Instead, she saw admiration, quiet, gentle admiration. Her coworkers smiled proudly, some nodded at her. One of the cooks had even stepped out from behind the counter just to listen. For them, this wasn't a performance. It was a revelation. They had worked with her for months, maybe years, and never knew she carried something like this inside her. Emma stood up from the bench slowly, her legs shaking slightly. She didn't want to make a big deal out of it, didn't want attention. She just wanted to walk away and breathe. But before she took a step, she glanced at Mr. Bennet. He wasn't clapping, he wasn't cheering. He simply sat there, hands folded, wearing a quiet smile, a smile that said more than applause ever could. His eyes held a look of pride, but not pride for himself, pride for her. Not because she played beautifully, but because she didn't run away. Emma took a shaky breath as she approached him, her voice barely worked. "I messed up," she whispered. "You kept going," he replied calmly. She looked down, embarrassed. "But I wasn't good." "You were honest," he corrected gently. Those words struck her in a place she didn't know was vulnerable. Honest, not perfect, not impressive, just honest. For a moment she didn't know how to respond. She stared at her hands, the same hands she once trained for hours a day, the same hands that failed her once and scared her into silence. Then something unexpected happened. Her knees buckled slightly and she grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. She wasn't fainting, she was overwhelmed. Too much emotion, too fast. Her breathing turned shallow, her chest tightened. She felt lightheaded, like the world was tilting beneath her feet. "Sit," Mr. Bennet ordered softly, standing halfway from his chair. Before she could argue, he helped her into a seat. Emma leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hands covering her face. She wasn't crying, she wasn't panicking loudly, she was just trying to breathe. Her coworkers rushed over. "Are you okay?" "What happened?" "Sit back, breathe." Someone brought her water. Someone else turned off the music. The entire restaurant shifted from audience to support system in a matter of seconds. Emma hated the attention, but she couldn't deny she needed help. Her heart beat rapidly, trying to catch up with everything she had just experienced: fear, pressure, pride, failure, success. It was too much for one night. Mr. Bennet crouched beside her, not touching her, but staying close enough to ground her. "It's all right," he said gently. "Your body is just reacting, it's normal." Emma shook her head weakly. "I feel stupid." "You're human," he replied. His voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice that made storms feel less dangerous. The staff hovered nervously, unsure what to do, but slowly Emma's breathing steadied, the dizziness faded, her hands stopped shaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to make a scene." Mr. Bennet shook his head. "You made more than a scene. You made a moment." She looked at him confused. "A messy moment," she said softly. "A real moment," he corrected. Emma sat back, exhausted but strangely lighter. For years she had carried her fear alone, believing it made her weak. But tonight she learned something new. Fear didn't disappear when you ignored it. It disappeared when you faced it, even shaking, even imperfect. And people didn't reject her when she failed. They supported her when she tried. Emma looked at the piano again, not with dread, but with a strange kind of gratitude. She didn't know if she could ever play confidently, or perform on a stage, or return to music the way she once dreamed. But for the first time in a long time, she felt something she thought she had lost forever: hope. Emma sat at the table, holding the glass of water in both hands as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. The room slowly returned to normal, but her body still felt wired with leftover adrenaline. Her heart wasn't racing anymore, but it wasn't calm either. It beat uncomfortably, too fast to relax, too slow to panic. Her coworkers hovered nearby, unsure whether to give her space or stay close. One of them, a young waitress named Mia, touched her shoulder gently. "Hey, don't worry, it happens. You were amazing." Emma nodded, but she didn't believe it. Amazing wasn't the word she would use. Terrifying, exhausting, overwhelming. Those seemed more accurate. Still, she whispered a quiet thanks, trying not to sound rude. Most customers had already left, and the ones who remained were minding their own business, trying to act like they hadn't just witnessed something dramatic. The restaurant felt calm again, but Emma could feel eyes glancing her way every now and then, curious, compassionate, not judgmental. She hated attention, even good attention. It felt like pressure. It made her feel seen in ways she wasn't prepared for. Mr. Bennett, however, didn't leave her alone or crowd her. He stayed nearby, sitting calmly, giving her time to recover. He didn't treat her like a fragile object that needed fixing. He treated her like someone who had gone through something difficult and deserved patience. After a few minutes, when Emma looked a little steadier, he spoke softly. "How are you feeling?" She hesitated, then she answered honestly, embarrassed. He nodded thoughtfully. "Why?" "I froze and everyone rushed over like I was dying." "You didn't freeze for long," he said, "and you didn't walk away." "What?" Emma looked down. She remembered how her fingers had refused to move, how her chest tightened, how panic almost dragged her back into darkness. "But I almost walked away," she whispered. "But you didn't." He didn't say it dramatically. Just calmly, like a fact. Emma stared at her hands again. Her fingers, which once played effortlessly, now felt unfamiliar and unpredictable. The same hands that had betrayed her years ago had betrayed her again tonight, shaking, slipping, losing control. Yet somehow those hands also brought music back into her life. "It wasn't perfect," she said. "It wasn't supposed to be," he replied. Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" "I didn't ask you to impress anyone," he said. "I asked you to remember." Those words made her chest tighten. Remember. She remembered too much and too little all at once. Then he continued gently, like someone carefully removing a bandage. "What happened tonight wasn't failure. It was fear leaving your body." Emma blinked, confused. "Fear leaving?" "Yes," he said. "Sometimes fear leaves quietly, and sometimes it leaves loudly, shaking, gasping, sweating, needing help to stand." What? Emma took a deep breath, thinking about his words. They didn't make the moment less embarrassing, but they made it feel less meaningless. Mr. Bennett leaned back slightly, giving her space again. "I've seen musicians freeze on stage," he said. "Some of them give up completely, others get back up and play again. Guess which ones succeed?" Emma didn't answer. She knew the answer already. The ones who keep going. But success felt like a distant dream, a fantasy she no longer trusted. "I don't think I'm," she struggled for the right word, "good enough anymore." Mr. Bennett's expression remained calm, steady, confident. "You don't need to be good enough now," he said. "You just need to start." Emma didn't respond. She couldn't. The sentence hit too deeply, touching the most fragile part of her heart, the part that still wanted something despite everything. She whispered, "I don't know if I can." "That's fine," he said. "You don't have to know. Just be willing." Emma stared at him, wondering why a stranger cared so much. Why would someone who had success, wealth, and recognition spend time encouraging a girl who was trying to survive shift by shift? "You don't even know me," she said quietly. "I know enough," he replied. "I know what it looks like when someone is fighting themselves." Emma looked away because he was right, painfully right. She had spent years fighting herself. Fighting her memories, fighting her fear, fighting her hope, and she was tired, so tired. Mr. Bennett took out his wallet and pulled out a card, placing it on the table just within her reach. "I support young artists," he said. "Scholarships, programs, training, mentorship." Emma stared at the card like it was a dangerous object. "Expensive, powerful, unpredictable. You're offering this to me?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. "Yes," he said plainly. "Why?" "What?" He smiled softly. "Because I don't invest in things that are safe. I invest in things that can grow." Emma felt her heart drop, heavy with confusion and fear. "I don't know if I want this," she whispered. "You don't have to decide today," he said. "Take time, breathe, think." Emma looked at the card again, tempted to push it away, tempted to grab it, tempted to cry. Everything felt possible and impossible at the same time. After a moment, he stood up, preparing to leave. He didn't give a speech or a lecture. He didn't pressure her. He simply looked at her with kindness and said, "You're not broken, you're unfinished." What? Those words hit her harder than any applause, any compliment, any opportunity. Unfinished, not failed, not useless, not over, unfinished. Emma didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she would ever call him, or if she would return to music, or if she would run away again. But she knew one thing for certain. Tonight changed something inside her, even if fear remained, even if doubt stayed close. Even if her life felt messy and uncertain, something had shifted. She was no longer a girl hiding from her past. She was a girl staring at a future she didn't yet understand, scared, curious, hopeful. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't running. After Mr. Bennet left, Emma stayed seated for a while, staring at the business card lying on the table. It felt unreal, like something that only happened in someone else's life, not hers. She had seen opportunities given to confident, talented people, but never to someone who was afraid of her own gift. The card felt heavy, even though it weighed almost nothing. Heavy with possibility, heavy with fear, heavy with responsibility. It wasn't just paper, it was a door. And doors were frightening because you never knew what waited on the other side. She slipped it into her pocket quickly, as if hiding it would make it less real. She didn't want anyone to ask questions, she didn't have answers. Her coworkers cleaned tables and stacked chairs, occasionally throwing her curious glances. When they passed by her, they spoke softly, not teasing like before, but genuinely supportive. "You did good," Mia said, giving her a gentle smile. "That took guts," another coworker added. Emma nodded, but she didn't feel brave. She felt shaken, embarrassed, uncertain. She didn't know how to receive compliments, especially when she didn't believe they were deserved. When her shift ended, she changed out of her uniform, grabbed her bag, and walked out into the cold night air. The city lights reflected off wet pavement, and cars passed by with soft noises that made everything feel quiet and distant. Walking home felt different tonight. Normally, she walked quickly, headphones in, head down. Tonight, she walked slowly, without music, letting her thoughts speak instead. Her mind replayed the moment she hit the wrong note, the mistake that triggered a panic she couldn't control. She remembered the fear squeezing her chest, the dizziness, the feeling of losing herself. She remembered collapsing forward, surrounded by people who didn't know what was happening inside her. It was humiliating, but at the same time strangely freeing. She didn't hide, she didn't run away, she didn't quit. And nobody judged her for struggling, they cared. A part of her wished the night had never happened, because it forced her to face emotions she had buried deep. But another part, a small, stubborn part, was grateful. For years, she convinced herself that if she ever played piano again, she would fail just like before. She believed failure would destroy her. But tonight she failed a little, and instead of destroying her, it made her stronger. Walking through the city, she caught her reflection in store windows and car doors. She looked tired, messy, overwhelmed. But she also looked alive, more alive than she had looked in years. When she reached home, she unlocked the door to her tiny apartment. It wasn't much, just a small living room, a tiny kitchen, a bedroom barely big enough for a bed. Most of her life felt small too, simple job, simple routine, small dreams. But tonight, something didn't fit in that smallness anymore. She switched on the light and quietly set her bag down. Then she approached the corner of the room where an old keyboard sat, covered with dust and forgotten memories. For a long moment, she simply looked at it. She hadn't touched it in years. She hadn't let herself. The keyboard represented everything she lost: confidence, passion, direction, identity. But now it also represented everything she might have left. With a shaky breath, she plugged it in. The power light flickered on, faint but steady. She sat on the edge of the chair, knees pressed together, fingers hovering above the keys. She pressed a single note, soft, hesitant. It sounded different from the grand piano at the restaurant, cheaper, flatter, but it still stirred something inside her. She tried a second note, then a third. Then, without fully intending to, she played the same melody she had played earlier that night, broken, inconsistent, full of mistakes. But she didn't stop, she didn't freeze, she didn't panic. She played through tears, not because she was sad, but because something inside her finally had space to breathe. By the time she stopped, her fingers were trembling and her heart felt too full. She leaned back, exhausted, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Before the night ended, she pulled the business card from her pocket and looked at it again. The name, the title, the phone number, everything felt intimidating. She wanted to throw it away because throwing it away would make things simple again, but she didn't. She placed the card gently on the table, not hidden, not ignored, visible, waiting. Maybe she wouldn't call, maybe she would. Maybe tomorrow, maybe someday. But for now, the card represented something she had lost and finally found again: choice. For years, her life was controlled by fear, fear of failure, fear of humiliation, fear of not being enough. Tonight, for the first time, she realized fear didn't mean she was weak. Fear meant she wanted something badly enough to be scared. She whispered into the quiet apartment, almost laughing at herself, "I'm still here." And she was. Broken, complicated, unsure, but here. Before going to bed, she sat by the keyboard again just for a moment. She pressed one more note, soft, clear, imperfect. But that note wasn't a test or a performance. It was a promise. Tomorrow didn't have to be big. Tomorrow didn't have to be perfect. Tomorrow just had to be better than yesterday. And that was enough. Emma woke up the next morning to the sound of sunlight streaming through her curtains. She blinked slowly, confused by how bright everything looked. Normally, mornings felt heavy, a reminder of another long day ahead. But today there was a strange softness in the air. Not happiness, not excitement, just possibility. She sat up on the edge of the bed, rubbing her eyes. Then she saw the keyboard across the room, still plugged in, still waiting. The sight startled her because it reminded her that last night had not been a dream. She really played. She really panicked, she really survived. And she really placed that business card on the table like a challenge to herself. Her heart tightened with anxiety at the memory, but underneath the fear was something small and stubborn: pride. For the first time in years, she had not run. Emma dragged herself into the kitchen and made a cup of coffee. She stood quietly, staring at the steam rising from the mug, thinking about everything Mr. Bennet had said. His words echoed like a second heartbeat. "You're not broken, you're unfinished." She wondered what he meant. She wondered if he said that to everyone. She wondered if he truly saw something in her, or if she imagined it because she desperately wanted it to be true. Part of her wanted to erase last night, pretend nothing happened, pretend she was still a simple waitress living a safe, risk-free life. But another part of her, the part that had been silent for years, didn't want to go back to that life. Not entirely. She finished her coffee and got dressed. She had work later and she was already nervous about returning. The restaurant wasn't just a workplace anymore, it had become the scene of one of the most vulnerable moments of her life. What would people say? Would they treat her differently? Would the piano always stare at her like a silent dare? She didn't know, but she walked out the door anyway. At the restaurant, she was surprised to find that nothing felt as dramatic as she feared. People smiled at her warmly. Some said good morning. A few asked how she was feeling, but not in a loud or annoying way, in a gentle, respectful way. It didn't feel like people were waiting for her to perform again. It felt like they were simply glad she was okay. That made her feel safer. But the piano still sat in its corner, silent and glossy, like a reminder of everything she had avoided for years. She looked away from it quickly, but it didn't feel threatening anymore, just familiar. During a slow hour, Mia approached her, leaning on the counter with a soft grin. "So, are you gonna become famous now?" she joked. Emma rolled her eyes, laughing. "Not likely." Mia shrugged. "Hey, you never know, people go viral for less." Emma laughed again, but something inside her twisted, because deep down she didn't want attention or fame. She just wanted peace with herself. A few minutes later, as she wiped down tables, the restaurant manager walked over. He wasn't emotional or dramatic, he just gave her a nod. "You did well last night," he said simply. Emma blinked, caught off guard. "Thanks." He tapped the piano lightly with his fingers. "If you ever want to play again, you can, no pressure." She nodded, unsure how to respond. Maybe someday. It was a small conversation, but it mattered. Permission without expectation. Later that night, when she finished her shift and walked home, she felt more calm than the night before. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't terrified. She wasn't replaying the panic in her head. Instead, she was replaying the music. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but honestly. When she reached home, she stepped inside and immediately looked at the keyboard. She didn't avoid it. She didn't stare at it with fear. She walked toward it, sat down, and placed her fingers on the keys. Not because anyone asked her to, not because she felt pressured to, but because she wanted to. She played softly, slow, simple, easy. No song in particular, just notes. The sound filled the small room like a quiet conversation between her and the instrument. And for the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't trying to impress anyone, not her teacher, not an audience, not herself. She was just playing for the sake of playing. When she finished, she sighed, long and peaceful. Then she looked at the business card again. She picked it up, turning it over in her fingers. The number stared back at her like a question: call or don't. Risk or stay comfortable, try or hide. She wasn't ready to make the call tonight. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not even next week. She still had a lot of fear inside her, fear of failure, fear of pressure, fear of being seen. But fear wasn't controlling her anymore, not like before. She placed the card carefully on her desk, this time not as a burden but as a reminder that she wasn't finished. She turned off the lights, walked to her bed, and lay down with a quiet smile, the small, tired smile of someone who had walked through fire and was still standing. She didn't know what her future would be. She didn't know if she would become a musician again or take a chance or call the investor. She didn't know if she would fail or succeed. But she knew one thing with gentle certainty: she wasn't living in the past anymore. And she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Emma closed her eyes and whispered to herself, not confidently but truthfully, "I'll try." And sometimes trying, even quietly, even slowly, is the beginning of everything. Even slowly, is the beginning of everything.